Hi, it's Brendan here. Before we get into this week's episode with Sall Grover, I just wanted to let you know about our latest sponsor, the Monk Debates. As a regular listener to this show, you're probably interested in hearing leading thinkers discuss the big, controversial questions of our time. And the Monk Debates are where those important questions get the discussion they deserve. You definitely won't want to miss the next Monk Debate on anti-Zionism. On 17th of June, commentator Douglas Murray, former MSNBC anchor Mehdi Hassan, and others will debate whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. The event will be taking place in downtown Toronto, but don't worry if you can't make it all the way to Canada. Supporters of the Monk Debates can watch the live stream for free. Becoming a supporter is the best way to make the most of the Monk Debates. For just $9.99 Canadian dollars a month, that's just under £6 a month for UK listeners, you'll get early access to tickets and priority seating at in-person events. Plus, you can browse all the past debates, dialogues and podcasts from the Monk Debates archive. So if you can't wait until the 17th of June for the next debate, supporters can watch and listen to 15 years worth of Monk events. You can watch Stephen Fry and Jordan Peterson debate Michael Eric Dyson and Michelle Goldberg on political correctness from 2018, or even watch the late Christopher Hitchens debate Tony Blair on the merits of religion from 2010. Whatever you're interested in, there will definitely be something for you. For a limited time only, Monk Debates are offering a 10% discount on supporter membership for listeners to this podcast. Just use the code SPIKED10 at checkout to get your 10% off. So, to find out more and claim your supporter discount, go to monkdebates.com. That's MUNK debates.com. And don't forget to use the discount code SPIKED10 to get 10% off. That's code SPIKED10 at checkout at monkdebates.com. Hello, welcome back to the Brendan O'Neill Show with me, Brendan O'Neill, and my special guest this week, Sall Grover. Sall, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We've wanted you on for some time to talk about Tickle versus Giggle, which is your court case that you're fighting on Australia, which is not only the best named court case ever, but it's also could have huge consequences for women's rights, potentially around the world. So to kick off, I wonder if, for listeners who might not be familiar with the case, I wonder if you could give us a brief outline on what it's about and where it currently stands.
Yeah, so you're right. It is the most ridiculously named court case of all time, Tickle v. Giggle. Like, you couldn't make this up. This is the What is a Woman court case. This is the sex versus gender identity court case. Now, it happened to me because I created an online platform for women, exclusively for women. And we can get into it later, but it was attacked very much by men who claim to be women. I didn't know about this issue beforehand. So I was brought into this, what they call a culture war because of it. In 2022, a man who goes by the name of Roxy Tickle filed an Australian Human Rights Commission complaint against me for gender identity discrimination because I had apparently removed him from the platform. And that escalated to a federal court case, which has been heard in the federal court. We had our hearing in April, and we're now waiting for the verdict. But basically, this was a case where a man who claims to be a woman versus a woman's only platform where biological sex is the only prerequisite, and which one is more important. And why it has global implications is because Australia is quite positioned actually to defend CEDAW, which is the Convention of the Elimination of Discrimination for Women and Girls, which is a UN convention. It's essentially an international bill of women's rights, which was created in 1979, signed by 189 countries around the world. But Australia and New Zealand are the two countries that really put it into law pretty much in full, really enlivened it. A lot of other countries have ratified it, UK being one of them. But we are really in a great position to defend it. And CEDAW is a international bill of rights for biological females. So we are basically defending that. All other countries who are defending women's rights will be able to sort of coast off that defense of the International Bill of Women's Rights, basically, which is CEDAW, and say, no, women's rights matter in law and women's rights are for biological females. What started as just something as an app has escalated beyond what I could have ever imagined.
It really has. That's a really useful outline for not only the substance of the case in terms of Roxy Tickle and why he wanted to be on the app and why you guys said he can't be on the app, but also it's a great outline in terms of what's at stake in this case, which is absolutely huge. You know, the definition of a woman is really on the line here. And the question, as you say, of what's more important, sex or gender. So there are so many questions in this case, which I think is why it has those global implications. But if we just, before we dig into some of those huge implications, I wonder if we could just go back to the beginning and talk about Giggle, or Giggle for Girls, to give it its full name. This is the app that you set up for women. Everyone in this conversation knows what a woman is. You set up this app for women. Tell us why you wanted to do that. What was the aim of the app? What was the purpose of having an app that was specifically for women to have that kind of social connection? What was your thinking behind it?
Yeah, so I will just preface it by saying Giggle for Girls is just the PTY name. So it was always trading as Giggle. We just couldn't register that name. But so the app was called Giggle. And I'll give you a little bit of the history of it. So I was working as a screenwriter in LA for almost 10 years. I was in LA for 8 years and then New York for almost 2. And I was there from 2009 to 2018. So this was very much pre-Me Too world. And it's as horrible as all of the accusations have claimed it to be. It really is quite a cesspool of a place. And when I came back to Australia, I went into therapy. I was quite a shell of a person. I had experienced a lot of sexual harassment and a lot of sexual abuse as well, like almost at the worst point you could get, but luckily I didn't get quite there. And in therapy, my therapist said to me, what you needed in your life was a really strong female support network. And it was such a light bulb moment. Everything just went off then. I was like, you're right. I did. I could see really clearly how different my life would have been had I had that. Because Hollywood is a very isolating place, like so many different competitive industries and so many big cities. And so I was just talking about that with my mom. And then that was sort of coupled with me telling her stories about how when I'd moved to New York and I wanted to find a roommate, and I'd gone on like roommates.com, and there'd be guys saying, you can rent a room here for free if you walk around naked, or do you want a boyfriend as well? Or do you want there'd be like foot fetishes, whatever, just get all the different messages. And, it's so horrible trying to find a room to rent, in general anyway. And I was just like, can there just not be one aspect of a woman's life where we don't have to deal with sort of this really unwanted sexual harassment? So we just thought, okay, well, we'll do a roommates app just for women. This conversation was in the space of about a week. We were like, well, it's not just roommates, it's all different things. And what escalated quite quickly is us wanting to create this little sort of corner of the internet where women could come together to connect and talk, whether it be to find roommates or freelance work or lesbian dating, or just to actually have a voice in a woman-only environment where there was no male interruption, whether it was women who needed to get the confidence to be able to have a voice and then go and use that in sort of, in the real world where there are both sexes, obviously. But what happened was we developed it, and then before we even got to launch it, I now know a trans activist found it and infiltrated it, attacked it, and did thousands upon thousands of one-star reviews and sent it into an algorithmic black hole that we were never, ever going to be able to get out of. So the app itself never really got a chance to take off or do anything or see its full potential. And it's offline at the moment because of the court case. So in terms of like what trans activists have done to my life, they have completely and utterly turned it upside down. We just wanted to create an app for women. And now I'm in this court case that can decide what a woman is.
Yeah, I mean, it is extraordinary that you create an app for those reasons you outlined there, which seem perfectly reasonable, I'm sure, to most people. The freedom of association of women to get together and share ideas or information or tips or whatever else they might want to do. And yet there was this extraordinarily hostile response from trans activists. And I wanted to ask you how quickly you realized that men were trying to get onto the app, because I was quite shocked to read that we'll talk about Roxy Tickle's actions in a moment. But my understanding is that quite a few men, trans-identified men, I suppose, tried to get onto the app, tried to break through. How quickly did you realize that was happening? And what did you think when that started happening?
Well, so to put it into just the context, the 7th of February 2020 is the day that I woke up to all of the abuse and all these men had infiltrated it. We were just like puttering along testing, and a handful of women around the world knew about it up until that point. It was thousands of men on that particular occasion. So that was the introduction. Then we just had no choice. We were like, okay, just tighten everything up, like just go with it. We have launched, like this is our launch, I suppose, because there was press talking about us, like, obviously calling us transphobic. It was very, very negative. But we were like, okay, we just have to be available in some way. We were in a state of shock at the time. That was sort of our decision that we made. And from that moment on until we closed it down just to do a renovation on it, but then the court case came along and so we haven't been able to reinstate it. But it was for 2 years, it was up, and I'm not kidding, like thousands of men a month. Like, I mean, sometimes it would be thousands of men a day. And I don't know what their gender identity is or anything like that. I don't know if these were always trans activists or men who call themselves women or anything like that. They were just male human beings. Because to have an online female-only space, what we worked out is the only way to do it was to have some sort of onboarding gatekeeping to keep it female-only. So I didn't know about this demographic of men, but I knew that there would be men who would want to try and get onto it. I mean, if there wasn't, you would almost say that there would be less of a need for a female-only space. We knew that men wanting to invade women's space created the need for women to have one, if that makes sense. And so it was actually my dad who discovered the software. There was a company who creates software that is like, it's not facial recognition, it's sex recognition. Basically, you could just take a selfie and AI could tell whether you're male or female, because it can. There's two different ways that AI can do this. One, through scanning of bone structure. Males and female bone structure is completely different. And two is just having a database of male and female photos. So put those together and you're going to get really accurate results. Now, we had it set to 94% accuracy, so we knew that there would occasionally be some men that came on. But once we had done the testing for it, we discovered that 94% accuracy for us meant that no women got denied unless they had like a blurry photo or whatever. But some men would occasionally get on. And we decided that we would be okay with removing them manually, so not to put a woman in a position where she was denied access to it. It was just the percentage that worked well for us, rightly or wrongly. Men trying to get on was in the thousands. Men getting on was, maybe like a few a week, but we would always just remove them. It would be fine. It wasn't a problem. And so in terms of the Roxy Tickle situation of it all, this was not an event in my life at the time. He was not unique, you know what I mean, of a man either getting on or being removed, nothing. The only two times he became unique in my life is one, he called and texted my phone, and two, he did the Australian Human Rights Commission complaint.
Have you ever been completely engrossed in a series on Netflix only to log in one day and see that it's disappeared? Streaming services are always changing their libraries around, so that movie you've had saved to your watch list for months probably won't be there for much longer. But a lot of people don't realise that you can actually get around this by using ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN lets you control where websites think you are located, so you can use it to access all kinds of region-locked content. Chances are that that show you are halfway through on Netflix is probably still available in another country. All you have to do is fire up ExpressVPN, change your location, and refresh Netflix. It's that simple. I've been traveling a lot lately, and it's really useful to be able to just log into my Netflix account and have access to everything I've been watching back home. You can even use ExpressVPN to watch streaming services that aren't normally available in your country, like BBC iPlayer if you live outside the UK. Plus, ExpressVPN works across all your devices, including smart TVs, phones, and tablets, so it's ideal for catching up on your favourite shows while travelling. There are plenty of other VPNs on the market, but one of my favourite things about ExpressVPN is that it can do all this without slowing down your devices. Whatever you want to stream, buffering, lag, and poor quality video will not be an issue. So if you want to get access to hundreds of new shows, go to expressvpn.com/Brendan and get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. That's expressvpn.com/Brendan for an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. expressvpn.com/Brendan. One of my favorite parts of this whole strange tale is the AI gatekeeping, because you're absolutely right. The bone structure between men and women is very different. You know, one of the points that is often made, and I've seen it made in relation to your case, is that the way in which archaeologists determine whether a long dead person was male or female is often by looking at the skull and also looking at the pelvis. So, you know, there are ways to tell these things. So it was very striking that you guys had AI gatekeeping and that it worked in most situations. But then, of course, as you say, every now and then someone got through. You guys kicked them off, which is absolutely the right thing to do. And then we get to the Roxy Tickle situation where he decides that it's really outrageous, an assault on his rights as a trans woman, as he would refer to himself, that you guys would not allow him to use the app. So what was it like the first time you heard that he was going to go to the Australian Human Rights Commission and make a big deal of this and demand his right as a supposed woman to use an app that is actually just for women?
Oh my God, I can completely set the scene. This is January 2022, and I was in isolation because I had COVID. Not only that, I was 15 weeks pregnant, and the Giggle was actually under attack at the time, and Business Insider had written an article accusing us of being racist because transphobe wasn't working, so they were going to racist. So it was just a nightmare of a week. And then I opened my email one morning and there was an email from the Australian Human Rights Commission saying, you have a complaint against you. Is this the best email to reach you on? And I said, yes, it is. I opened it up and it was an Australian Human Rights Commission complaint from Roxanne Tickle alleging gender identity discrimination. And I was like, oh my God. To be honest, I actually didn't really know the magnitude of it at that moment. I just thought, oh, what even is this? And I called Catherine Deves, who has now actually become my solicitor, but she was my friend at the time who I'd met through all of this. She's another woman in Australia who does amazing work fighting for women's rights. So I called her and she said, okay, you need to get legal representation. And I did. And that's when it was explained to me, like, okay, this can escalate to the High Court, basically. That's where this is headed. Either you just agree to it, you bow down to it and go, okay, he and all these men can come on, I'll do whatever you say, or you stand your ground. And I just felt I had no choice but to stand my ground. But even beyond it just being a thing about female-only spaces, it was also just about truth and reality for me. I just can't let it go. I can't live a lie like that. So I just was like, well, no, it's not true. This person is not a woman. I'm not going to accept being told that he is. So, okay, let's fight it. What do we have to do? And cut to 2 years later, here we are.
And what was it like at this first stage with the Australian Human Rights Commission? I mean, I've followed the Human Rights Commission in Australia for some time, and some of the cases that they hear, it doesn't strike me as an institution that actually stands up for rights or human rights. It very often seems to me to be a bit of a kangaroo court that drags people to answer questions if they, you know, have unfashionable views or if they say something controversial. It does seem to me to be a quite censorious body that's not really linked to the idea of rights. But what was it like for you? Because you had to go there, didn't you, and make your case in relation to what Roxy Tickle was saying.
Well, your assessment of them, in my opinion, is correct. From the moment, really, I started engaging with them, I felt that they were never considering the fact that I might have human rights as well. It was very much just, you have done something wrong and you need to make amends for that. And I was sitting there going, I have done absolutely nothing wrong. I know that men are not women, and I will, I'll stand my ground on that. In the Australian Human Rights Commission, how it works is if a complaint is made, it's basically a place to sort things out before they escalate to court. And from the Australian Human Rights Commission, they would go to federal court. They can be there to sort of just, stop it from going to federal court and clogging the courts, which in that sense is a great thing if they're working correctly. But the conditions for me to settle it in the Australian Human Rights Commission was that I would have to let Roxy Tickle on, let all men who claim to be women on the platform go to sex and gender education, which could only be re-education, and then also moderate the content on the platform so not to offend any man who claims to be a woman. And I just was like, no. And on top of this, by this point, when we were going back and forth with this, I was about 6 months pregnant by this point, and I was like, no, I'm not doing this. If we want to talk about lived experience, I got the Australian Human Rights Commission complaint when I was 15 weeks pregnant. At 20 weeks pregnant, I went and got a scan and found out while my baby was still in utero that I was having a girl. So I was experiencing the complete opposite of what they were claiming to be true, and which really highlighted the bullshit of it, basically. So I said no to conciliation, knowing that the risk was that the applicant, Roxy Tickle, could take it to federal court. In a way, it was sort of a risk I was willing to make because I wasn't going to agree to anything that they were saying. They were not willing to have a conversation or go like, oh, maybe you do have rights. Let's have a look at what the conflict is. Now, interestingly, once it did escalate to federal court, the Australian Human Rights Commission intervened as amicus curiae in the case, which is friend of the court. They were there to interpret the law. And so my instincts that they did not care about my rights at all were very much confirmed by their actions in this case. So they intervened saying, we understand that there is a conflict of sex and gender. It's like, fantastic, that's the TERF position. Finally, we have some common ground here. But then they proceeded to solve that conflict with gender. Now, keep in mind, this is the Sex Discrimination Commissioner trying to solve the issue of sex versus gender with gender. So none of it makes sense. And the submissions they made are publicly available on the federal court website. They have said that there's no such thing as biological sex, that men or women, human beings can change sex. A man desiring to be pregnant is sufficient for him to be considered a woman in the Sex Discrimination Act. It's wild. It's like a bad draft of 1984 that Orwell would have thought no one would have believed. It's absolute nonsense. But that is their submission in a federal court case. And the most horrible part of it is that they will probably win.
You know, listening to you talk about your experience with the Australian Human Rights Commission, I mean, it is so shocking when you think about it that a pregnant woman would be dragged to what was essentially a kind of show trial in order to be pressured to accept men into a space that she created for women. I mean, it really is a kind of dystopian image that one gets of what happened with your case and what's happening in Australia. The fact that human rights commissions can be used in this way, it brings to mind the Jessica Yaniv case in Canada, where he went to the British Columbia Human Rights Council and demanded the right to have his testicles waxed by women. You do think to yourself, when human rights can be cited in this way to fortify the rights of men and even the fetishes of men against the rights of women to live as they want to live and to associate freely with one another, you do realize that what is referred to as human rights is often a bit of a a bit of a trap, and something that harms women's rights rather than defending them. So when you were going through that experience with the Human Rights Commission in Australia, did it make you wonder what these institutions are for? What role do they play in society? And did it make you rethink your attitude to some of these ideas?
Completely. It has made me rethink everything. In fact, I don't actually know how I'll ever vote again. And in Australia, we actually have compulsory voting. You get fined if you don't vote. And I've always had a lot of respect for the democratic process and for voting and for being able to vote. Not only do I know that women had to fight for this right, but also, you know, there are many places, not just women, but both men and women can't vote. So I've always had a lot of respect for it and taken that part of it quite seriously. But the fact that there is a government body telling me that men are women, they have never cared about my rights, they are aware there's a conflict, but they couldn't care less about resolving it in any fair way that reflects everybody's rights, and that legislators are aware that this is going on and they don't do anything, has made me lose complete trust in institutions, in organizations, and in government in general, because I understand, I get how it works. I get that legislators and politicians in general are just like, oh, you know, if there's no votes in it, we're not going to talk about it. And are there any votes in this issue? Probably from a trans rights or a women's rights perspective, no, there isn't. But from a freedom of belief and freedom of speech perspective, there is. 100%. That's the bedrock of a secular, liberal, democratic society. And if we don't have those, we have nothing. So I think gender ideology actually, at the essence of it, is freedom of speech and freedom of belief and freedom of association as well. And that is what these fearful legislators should be going and fighting for. And if they don't, and that they can't see that, it makes me go like, how utterly useless are you with everything? Like, I do go, what on earth are you all doing now? What is this the distraction for the next thing? But at the same time, I don't know if there's anything crazier than trying to make human beings believe that men are women or women are men and that human beings can change sex. Like, for me, this is one of the most important, if not the most important issues of our time, because if they can make you believe men are women, they can make you believe anything. And once they can make you believe that, all bets are off and you have no rights at all because you don't have the right to acknowledge reality. And that's terrifying. I didn't think that was something I'd ever experienced in my lifetime.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's at the nub of this entire question, which is what it makes it such an important question, which is, do we have the right to acknowledge reality, to describe what we see with our own eyes, and to speak the truth? Are we free to speak the truth in public? That's really what this comes down to. On that issue, I wanted to bring it forward to the federal court case, which, as you say, has been heard and you're awaiting the verdict. Speak a little bit about that case, because you mentioned earlier that your case rests on the definition of woman in the UN's Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. That was ratified in 1979. Australia is a signatory to it, and that convention is pretty clear on what a woman is. A woman is a woman. Everyone knew what a woman was in 1979. So your case rests on saying, listen, Australia, you're a signatory to this international treaty, which very clearly outlines the rights of women, and therefore it's unacceptable for you to now redefine woman to mean a feeling or gender or a costume that can be pulled on by anyone, including a man like Roxanne Tickle. So that's the heart of your case, isn't it? And I wanted to ask you if you could outline why you went down that road. Did it have an impact on the people in the court, do you think? Did they take on board what you were saying?
So the only way to fight back against this, actually, when you're dealing with it from a legal perspective, is actually to deal with it with legal arguments. It's so different to when we're in these sort of situations and creating either just the sort of philosophical or moral arguments for anything. The law is bound by conventions and treaties and legislation and whatnot. And so what happened in Australia is in 2013, there were amendments made to the Sex Discrimination Act that put gender identity into it. So that's how we're in this position right now. Now, in CEDAW, there is no mention of gender identity in the sense of, saying men or women, and that means that they are included in this or anything like that. What has happened in the last few years is that there's a few ratified documents surrounding CEDAW that say things like sexual orientation and other status. And so places like the Australian Human Rights Commission are relying on that other status to mean gender identity and to get that through as if CEDAW has ratified gender identity. If you accept that argument, you accept that argument. I personally do not, and nor do many people, and nor should they. In Australian law, the Sex Discrimination Act can't be in breach of CEDAW. It's as simple as that. Now, you can also make a case that sort of affirmative action type measures are supposed to fall away eventually. The law evolves, the law ages and whatnot. But that hasn't happened in this case. Again, I would argue that there's not been anything that's evolved to the point where men have become actually women. So if we want to have laws that protect men who think that they are women, that's fine. Have them. Create as many of them as you want, so long as they are laws that just protect men who think that they are women and they don't impinge on anyone else's rights. Which one is more important in the Sex Discrimination Act? Is it gender identity or is it sex? No one knows. In terms of what people care about, what they accept, I can't really speculate in a sense. I would only ever have my opinions on that anyway. It's hard. You're so biased because you're there going, well, we're in a court situation. I thought that courts were about evidence and truth, and there's been no evidence presented that a man is a woman. There's no truth that a man is a woman. So that should be enough, surely. But, here we are in this weird upside down world. And if you're bound by the fact that gender identity is just currently in legislation and you're just going to accept legislation as it is, well, then that's where it does not come out in Giggle in my favor. And that's when we would escalate it to the High Court.
So this is a bit speculative, and you've already said in passing that you think you will lose. But I did want to ask you, what do you think will happen? And not only what do you think will happen in this federal court case, but also what you think will happen if you win or if you lose. Because it seems to me, maybe I'm being a bit Pollyanna about it, but it seems to me that whether you win or lose, it's been an incredibly important case and it will blow up as a consequence. So if you guys win, it's going to have a huge impact on the definition of a woman and the rights to speak the truth in Australia and elsewhere in the world. If you lose, I think it could potentially pique a few more people, get a few more people interested and possibly even outraged at the fact that, as you say, a court that is supposed to be devoted to the truth is not even willing to stand up for the reality that there are men and women and that they are different. And that could potentially give rise to further dissent on the question of transgenderism and a few other issues too. So what's your prediction of what will happen in this particular stage of the case and the consequences that might follow from it?
So I'm fully prepared to go to the High Court, mentally and emotionally. I've always known. I was told from the AHRC days that was really where this was headed. Because at the end of the day, just say if by some miracle I was to win in federal court, the other side has every right, to appeal it, and that could be accepted and to go to the High Court. And then if we were to lose in federal court, we would appeal it and to go to the High Court. The High Court in Australia is a error in law court, so it's solely an appeals court. We would be going there on the basis, essentially, that an error in law has happened because biological sex has been given no weight in the Sex Discrimination Act, which is a pretty strong case. Then once you go to the High Court, you then have to argue why biological sex is the thing that's important in society and in law and why that needs to be. Now, biological sex is the fairest possible way to categorize society when it's needed to be categorized and to create the least amount of discrimination. Because the issue for me has always been, I'm going to court for alleged gender identity discrimination. Now, I maintain that what I've actually done is sex discrimination, but under the Sex Discrimination Act, how it used to be, that was completely legal because I was excluding men to help women, basically. And I didn't exclude any women who themselves have a gender identity. Like, my argument's always been, if I said that females who thought themselves to be men or thought themselves to be cloud gender or any of the ridiculous genders that exist, if I said no to them, that would be gender identity discrimination. Saying no to a male is just sex discrimination. His gender identity is irrelevant to me. Like, a man who claims to be a woman is not allowed on the platform for the exact same reason as my dad, who is just my dad, is not allowed on. It's because he's male. It's just sex-based. That's all. So we're in this situation where if gender identity was to supersede sex in law, it's going to create more discrimination, because where do the women who have a gender identity go to play sport? Because at the moment, they rely on their sex-based rights. Where do the non-binaries go to play sport, or where do they go for their single-sex spaces, whether it's bathrooms, change rooms, apps, what have you? They rely, again, on their sex-based rights for that. Sex-based rights actually just creep up on you, and you don't even realize you're using them on a daily basis. And I think it'd be very dangerous to have gender identity supersede law in any way, shape, or form, because the only people it would benefit are men who claim to be women, because they would be getting the privilege to go into a female-only space, which is a privilege they should not be afforded and is something that no one else has.
It's such an Orwellian case in so many ways, and this issue in itself is Orwellian because it's presented as a crusade against discrimination. So you are the discriminating person, you have obliterated the rights of this supposed trans woman. That's how it's presented, and that's how some people sadly understand it. But what's really happening is that this case and other aspects of the trans movement are discriminating against women in a real way, in fact, in a bigoted way, in the way that we all would agree is a bad way to discriminate, through saying that you are forbidden from having the freedom of association. You are forbidden from having your own spaces. You are forbidden from enjoying privacy and dignity, and you are forbidden from having your own freedom to believe and speak as you see fit on issues related to women. So it's kind of classic. It's not sex discrimination in the way that you describe it, which is sometimes perfectly legitimate in order to create spaces that women and in some cases men, might want. It's that kind of old-fashioned bigoted discrimination, which is restricting the rights of women to hang out with each other and to speak and to express their views in the public realm. So there's a real Orwellian twist to this, isn't there? Because it's presented as a crusade for the rights of supposed trans women, but actually it's laying waste to the rights of women.
100%. I've said for a long time, the person being discriminated against here is me. No other demographic has ever had to justify why they want a space for themselves, really. Did Jewish people ever have to justify why they wanted J-Date? Or when it was established, did gay men have to justify Grindr? No, it was just accepted. Of course, it makes sense that this particular demographic has a platform specifically to cater to them. One of the things I always wonder is the onus on women to explain why we need a platform or spaces in real life to cater to our specific needs? Or is the onus, on the people who object to a woman-only space? And I'd argue it's the latter, because a specific need for women is talking to women with no men around. That's as important to our equality in society as anything else is. And so the moment you are engaging, saying that gender identity discrimination is something, you are inevitably discriminating against another demographic on the basis of sex. So it is a bit of a choose your poison, and the AHRC has, that's for sure.
Hi, it's Lauren here, producer of The Brendan O'Neill Show. I just wanted to let you all know that Spike's internship program is now open for applications. We're looking for an aspiring journalist to join our team on a 6-month paid full-time placement. You'd be working with us at the Spiked office in London, helping us do everything from putting out our articles to producing podcasts like this one. And you don't need any prior experience to apply. What we're looking for is someone who has a spark for journalism, writing, or podcasting, and who has a passion for our pro-freedom, pro-human message. Everything else you can learn on the job. I started at Spiked as an intern, so I can highly recommend applying for this. It's an amazing experience, and you get to earn while doing something you love. There really is nowhere better to kickstart your career in journalism. To find out more and to apply, go to spiked-online.com/interns. That's spiked-online.com/interns. You have until Sunday, the 19th of May to apply. Good luck.
Let's talk a little bit about philosophical elements of this, as you referred to it earlier, and the right to tell the truth, because I think that is so essential to this whole issue. And I think some people underestimate just how important it is in a free democratic society to be able to speak truthfully and to be able to describe the reality that we all live in. So you are currently fighting essentially for the right to say that that person over there is a man and therefore he shouldn't be allowed into this space because this space is for women. So at the base of this case is the right to tell the truth. And this week we've seen J.K. Rowling get into trouble once again in the media and amongst the kind of trans activists online because she used the word bloke to describe a bloke, a trans identified man who has become the manager of a women's football team. And J.K. Rowling made a very pithy, I think quite funny quip about how football managers used to always be middle-aged white blokes, and it seems that they still are. She's in trouble now, accused of misgendering, accused of bullying, accused of being a bigot, when in fact she actually just spoke the truth. So how important do you think it is to be able to use the correct pronouns, to correctly sex people, to tell the truth about, that man in a wig being a man in a wig? This is really at the root of this, isn't it?
100%. As I said earlier, if we don't have freedom of speech, we have nothing. So while I understand that there are these men or some women as well who claim to be men who are very offended when we use correct speech to identify them, well, you know what? I'm really offended when they tell me what to say. I'm really offended by men claiming to be women, but I'm not going to stop them from doing it. This is the difference. They are welcome to call themselves women. They can call themselves she until the cows come home. I don't care about that. What I care about is forcing other people to say it. That's all that really matters here. We live in a society where lots of different people have lots of different beliefs and views on the world and what's right and what's wrong. And it works because we have the social construct that anyone can believe whatever they want. That has been completely thrown out the window with gender ideology. And the reason it has been thrown out the window is because this ideology does not work at all if some people don't believe it or don't adhere to it or just don't submit to it. The moment you have one person going, I don't think that man is a woman, the whole facade falls. So you have to just have everybody saying that he is so that he feels like he is. So we're in a situation where we all have to just give up our freedom of belief and our critical thinking faculties to make the man in the ugly dress and the fake boobs and the bad wig happy. J.K. Rowling's right. The point she was making was that nothing has changed. It's just dudes are still the refs. Yeah. Like a really great thing would have been if there was a woman ref, which I know that there are some. So it wouldn't even be that much of news at this point if there was a woman ref. But the fact that a man's wearing a wig and we're supposed to celebrate this, that it's stunning and brave, now all he's done is put on a wig. I made this point a few months ago that for my particular case, most people, even like the really progressive woke people, would be all on my side if it was just a guy who called himself a guy taking me to court. Because they'd be like, oh, this horrible white man is taking Sall to court. But the moment that white man is calling himself a woman, suddenly I'm the bad one. No, I don't accept it. All that these people have provided is a scapegoat for these guys to go into. Now, I understand why some of them do. I don't think that it's right to just demonize all white men. Like, that's horrible. It's definitely not helping young white guys because they're having a little bit of an identity crisis themselves. And I have sympathy for that. I think that the best thing to do would be to stop trying to just label people and put them into boxes and saying these ones are just bad just by the definition of, their skin color or their sex or their age group or whatever. And just going like the content of your character. But J.K. Rowling was right. And she's being told that she's not being kind or she's being a bit meaner than what she was a few years ago. You know what? I've been in this for 4 years as well. Like, I started speaking up around the time that J.K. Rowling's essay first came out. So that was 2020. So it was around the time when I'd sort of been introduced to this and I was working out what to do. And, I've said no really politely. I've been really polite to this demographic. And I've also, stood my ground, which is that's what I'm doing in court. No matter what I do, whether I'm nice or I'm really saying, fuck no, they treat you the same. The death threats come in the same way. The rape threats come in the same way. Everything. You still end up in court. So I don't think it's the tone that women are using that is the problem. I think it's the fact that we're saying no. It's not just women. It is all of us. We're just saying no to this absolute lie. I just want the lie to stop. Society would be fine if it was some guys saying that they were women. Society wouldn't be in a mess. You'd be like, oh, look at those guys over there sort of having fun, whatever. It's because institutions and organizations and governments have been captured by it. They had to, because if they don't, then the illusion goes away. They need us all to believe it to keep their fantasy going.
It seems so clear to me that J.K. Rowling has just had enough of their bullshit. And that's what's coming across, which makes perfect sense to me, given that she's been subjected to death threats, rape threats, abuse every single day for years, simply for saying that men are not women. So, I personally think her tone is absolutely fine. And more importantly, that she can use any tone that she wants. If she is running out of patience, that makes sense. And I'm not surprised that that's happening with many women involved in this issue. I think you make such an important point about how this illusion collapses if anyone says it's not true, it's not real. There is this real desperation for validation amongst the trans movement. They absolutely crave validation for their identity. And I think that's one of the reasons they're so keen to barge onto your app or into women's bathrooms, women's changing rooms, women-only spaces, because they constantly require a validation of their identity. And if there's any space out there that doesn't let them in, that's essentially saying to them, you're not a real woman. So they feel, I think some activists feel this real urge to invade those spaces in order to demonstrate that they are real women. So there's a very clear connection, I think, between their need for validation and this growing disrespect for women-only spaces and this invasion of women-only spaces. As you say, I mean, it is misogyny in drag. If ordinary blokes were to do some of the things that trans activists are doing, it would be recognized by the woke and people on the left as misogyny. If a man was to go into a women's changing room and take his clothes off, that would be referred to as indecent exposure, a form of sexual harassment. But if a man who claims to be a woman does it, it suddenly becomes a human right. So, it's such a twisted situation. But I did want to ask you about the consequences of a culture that refuses to distinguish between men and women and refuses to uphold women's right to their own spaces. Because, even though I think your case clearly is a very serious one, which has thankfully raised these issues to the forefront of discussion, and I think will continue to do so, there are other cases where it's even more serious, like rapists in women's prisons, for example, or women's sports being completely obliterated by young men, teenage boys who claim to be girls and so on. So much is at stake here, isn't there, in relation to women's right to live freely and to have fulfilling lives in society in the 21st century.
Yeah, as I said, I just wanted to create an app, so I had no idea what I was walking into. It's just, you sort of feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders some days. Even like beyond my spaces, the sports, everything like that, just if we can't just like acknowledge the truth, what a dystopian world are we living in? But then the next layer to that is obviously these categories in society that are really, really relevant. Australia, for example, with the prison situation is, we're sort of one of the leading ones per capita. We have so many men in women's prisons. It's scary. In Queensland, which is the state that I live in, by mid-2020, so we have like 800, around 800, I think it's closer to 900, about 870 female inmates. But there was like 80 men waiting to be moved into the female estate because they're claiming to be women. So, you're looking at 10% of the female prison population being males. Why? We know that this is wrong. This is against, even different international law. Like this is like the Hague stuff. Separating men and women in these contexts was actually done for women's human rights. And to just completely ignore that just because of a man can claim it. My barrister in our case, she just boiled it down so beautifully. She said that a woman is not a thought and that discrimination law cannot be based on a thought. This came from the Australian Human Rights Commission saying that you really didn't even have to dress as a woman if you don't want to. You don't have to do anything like that. You just have to think it. And how on earth can anybody be guilty of discrimination for not knowing what someone thinks about themselves? That's the precedent that we're setting. Like that's what gender ideology comes down to. It's just what people think about themselves. My position is think whatever you want. Just don't make me think it. If saying you're a woman is what gets you out of bed every morning and lives your best life, cool. I don't care. I only care if you're making me and by extension everybody else believe it. So who's the illiberal one?
I couldn't agree more. Sall, my final question for you is just about, I guess, what happens if and when this goes to the High Court. You said that you sometimes feel like you got the weight of the world on your shoulders because all you wanted was an app for women to talk, and suddenly you're having to basically fight for truth and reality and the very idea of what a woman is, which seems to be a thing that women shouldn't have to fight for in 2024. But here we are. If it goes to the High Court, do you feel fully ready for that? Is this something now that you feel that you have to devote yourself to because the stakes are so high? Or does it sometimes feel like a foreboding thing to have to take on, that you have to go to court and defend something that just a few years ago, everyone would have understood perfectly well?
I think both, really. I feel both ways. I've always known that this is where it's going to end up, and now it's becoming closer to being a reality. And so you do sometimes get a bit overwhelmed by that. But I'm also not going to stop, the marathon halfway through. Litigation is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not like I'm going to have a federal court verdict say, oh, okay, well, we think that he's a woman. It's not like I'm going to go, oh, okay, well, then now that the court said it, I believe it. No, I'm going to go, no, this is still nonsense, and I'll fight for women's rights till the end. And along the way, hopefully inspire people not only to speak up, but legislators to actually do something about it. Because this could be solved in a week if Australian legislators, and this is the same with politicians all around the world, if they actually just went, oh no, there is a conflict of rights here. Okay, we're going to have to work out how to cater to this demographic's rights without impinging on these people's rights. They could do it in a week. In terms of like the Sex Discrimination Act. It's just a simple, shift F7, search, insert, definition of woman, adult, human, female. There we go. Let's put it back in there. It's going to cost a lot of money. So for federal court, it was $500,000. And from the generosity of strangers all around the world who support us and who care about this issue and truth and women's rights and freedom of speech and belief, we raised $500,000. For High Court, it's going to be $500,000 to $750,000. So by the time this is over, it'll be about $1.2 million in on this. That's intimidating as well. It's like a whole other level of intimidation of how much money you have to spend as a private citizen. Again, when the people you elect to represent you could just be doing this as part of their job, and they're not. So to leave it to me, I think, is quite insulting. For them, I'm like, why on earth would you leave this to a private citizen to do? Why wouldn't you guys go and take this into your own hands? But here we are. Once it goes to the High Court, this particular case, it's not a he said, she said, gender identity discrimination case anymore like it was in the federal court. You are then going, is this law actually valid? Which is always part of our defense, but that defense might not kick in until the High Court. Let's see. Which is a constitutional challenge of us saying that the 2013 amendments are unconstitutional, shouldn't be there to begin with. And there's very, very strong arguments that they should not be there. For me, I'm really excited to end this madness. I want to move on with my life. I want to run an app for women and raise my daughter and live a very quiet, nice life. I don't have aspirations beyond that. In the meantime, to get to there, I'll do everything I can to make sure that that's what I can do. You can't plan life, do you? Something happens and you just have to rise to the occasion. So I feel that that's what it's like. But yeah, this Tickle v. Giggle has been the last 2 years of my life. I'm looking down the barrel of it being another year, 18 months. It's a lot. I'm quite bored by it, to be honest. I can't stand talking about him. How many different ways can you say men are not women? It's just like I'm running out of ways to say it. It's madness. But this is the mess society's gotten itself into. And if I can play a little part in fixing it, I'm happy to do so.
Sall, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.